and you share with me.
Sure.
That'd be great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So to back up just for a second, we're going to talk about where recruiting is going to be going in 2019. And I'm providing this for just a little context of how I see the world. Not that it's right or wrong, it's how I see the world and based on my experience where we're headed. So a lot of people think about funnels, but I think about the recruiting process is more of this infinity circle or this infinite circle of loops that we're involved in. So everything starts with a job, and we send that job out to a lot of different places. So it happens through some automation for most larger companies, and then for some smaller organizations, it's more of a hands-on process. The first stage of the process, if we think about you and I as recruiters or sourcers, is a stage where we consider what the job is. So it might entail the rec review. It certainly is going to require some us thinking about the kind of talent we're going to be targeting, and a lot of us are given the opportunity to map talent to the recs that we have today. So that's really the first stage. It's more of doing that research. The second stage that I think about is, how do we find these people? We've got the information on what they're like. Let's go meet them individually and collectively and see who they are. So a lot of the conversations around sourcing tools and so forth fall into this area. And the next stage is how do we engage these people? And two prominent ways of doing that today are inbound and outbound recruiting. And I just like to pause here just for a second and talk about that. So when you think about inbound recruiting, think of Captain Kirk, and he's in the middle of one of those tractor beams that's sucking him to a planet that he doesn't want to go to. And that's really what inbound recruiting is about. It's about pulling people into your applicant tracking system or your CRM or those kind of things. It's using a number of different tools and techniques, and most of it's done by automation these days. It doesn't really impact most of us in on this call. It's where you think about search engine optimization, you think about banner ads, you think about pay-per-click, all of those kinds of things. The reason I mention this is I think there's a lot of misunderstanding today and generally in the recruiting community on what inbound is. Because it's a new word, everybody wants to be involved in inbound recruiting. But the truth is, most of us aren't, unless you're in recruitment marketing or automation of some sort, you're not. What we do is outbound recruiting. And there's nothing wrong with outbound recruiting. It's just a more traditional way of doing things. And so where we get involved with an email message, whether we might pick up the phone and talk to someone, where we develop contact lists or send text messaging, or get involved with writing an article that might help people be more familiar with the recruiting process, or whether we do a webinar to a target audience. Those are the kinds of things that we get involved in outbound recruiting. And so think about that as we go through this conversation today. The whole purpose of whether it's inbound or outbound is to get our folks to the apply system. And so the inbound people are going to go into a funnel that will take them into a technology stack, and the stack will have a CRM or an ATS or a recruitment marketing platform or some version of all of those. And then once a person gets to this point, they've really completed the prospect journey. So to me, there's kind of two journeys that we're looking at: a prospect journey, and then we'll think about this as being the candidate journey. So once somebody's applied and they go through all of these different processes internally with us, we see that we need to nurture these people. So that's where you are reading and hearing a lot about, communities and networks and, how do we keep people engaged, and we have them sign up for digital alerts and those kind of things. So that's kind of the journey as I see it. So two kinds of sides to the journey, and we'll dive just a little deeper into the prospect journey in a little bit. But so to set that stage, I've always heard that recruiting is combined, a little art and a little science. But what I'm finding out is that it's a little bit more than that. So we think of art and science, and I've kind of operated that way, but we're told now that there's 3 more hats that we have to wear. One hat is a marketing hat, where this monster survey of a lot of different recruiters across North America suggests that marketing is a big part of their job. They have to understand marketing terminology, and recruiting has become much more marketing focused. They have to be data analysts. They have to wear that Stetson every once in a while that says, I need to understand what this data means and how to use it in my work. And they also have to be digital specialists, is what Monster calls it. I think of it as a technologist. We really have to know tech and get involved in it. And so all of this, all this new stuff, plus these headlines that we're seeing all the time, which is, talent scarce, we have to do more with limited budgets. We're all competing for the same kind of talent. The Gartner CEB suggests that most of the larger companies, something like 90% of us, are all looking for the same kind of talent. So whether you're in healthcare or manufacturing or whatever it is, there are certain profiles, about 21 of them, that we're all looking for. The other thing that's interesting to me is it takes a lot of people to contact to make a hire. Social Talent does an annual survey of recruiters, and this dictates that it takes about 225 people we have to touch in order to make a hire through the work that we do. If you're advertising and so forth, JobBite says that you have to reach 270 people now in terms of ad responders to make a hire. Lever did some work and some while ago, and they indicated that it takes about 15 hours of work to get a hire in terms of sourcing the number of candidates you'll need for that. So I think one of the things that most people don't realize, or most of our leaders don't realize, or at least not acknowledging it, is the amount of time that it takes to do something. And frankly, I don't think we have enough time. The Monster survey, kind of concluded with that. There's not enough time to do this work. There's not the kind of training that we need to do the work. And we just have to learn all these new things. Half of our job isn't recruiting and sourcing, it's learning. And so it's presenting some challenges to us. So take a breath. Here's where we are. We're going to talk about recruiting in the context of these 5 areas. So it's part art, it's part science, it's part data, it's part being a technologist, and it's part marketing. So within that, the roadmap for this morning, or this afternoon for some of you, is we're going to look at the art piece of it, and we're going to talk about how to create the best version of yourself in this. For the science, we're going to talk about the foundational elements of sourcing and recruiting. In the data side, we want to look at the importance of owning the data and owning a relationship with the people. On the technology side, I want to talk a little bit about a personal technology stack and how to create one and what that could look like. And on the marketing side, we're going to focus a little bit on to know how to become known to people and also to be in the know on several different things. So when you think about the best version of yourself, and how do you create that? I think, first of all, I think a lot about Russell Wilson because he's winning football games for my Seahawks. But one of the things about Russell is that he came into the National Football League with this attitude of "why not me?" And he quotes his father in this, and it's a combination of confidence, it's a combination of optimism, and something called mindfulness that he practices, and so it has created winning football teams, and I've seen it work in different areas of business, and for us personally, I think that we need to think about that in our own roles and how we live our lives is why not me? And just as a foundational point of doing our practicing our craft. Another thing is for those of us that want to do things beyond just our daily job, want to take part in communities like Sourcing 7, that we want to get involved in other things. I think it's important to find your voice. I think each of us have gifts and abilities that are unique to us, and we've sure seen it in Sourcing 7. As I said on the board over the last number of years, I guess we're going to be 10 years old this year. We've had a lot of people that have shared their ideas and their perspective, and each one was unique. There's no pattern. They may follow a similar process, but each person had different gifts and abilities, and I encourage you to think about that, depending on where you are in your career, the state of your work life and family life, and those kind of things. And the one thing that I'm going to dive a little deeper on today is just some things that we can think about how to hone our craft a little bit more. So when I think about our craft, I think about keeping informed on what's going on, from something as simple as getting a recruiting tip of the day, which illustrates new tools that are out there, just one idea a day. It's really easy to consume and to follow that. ERE Media puts out some great blogs. Recruiting Daily does the same. If you want to learn about different aspects of talent sourcing, groups like the Secret Sourcing Group are a great way. Some of the better international experts in sourcing and recruiting comment on problems that people have. Locally, we have a Sourcing 7 Facebook group that is committed to doing the same thing, where you can go pose a problem or a challenge, and some of our board members and members will sort of crowdsource an idea for you. Or if you want to follow what's going on in industry, we curate content to our LinkedIn group on a daily basis. So just kind of keep up with what's going on. Another way to hone your craft, I think, is to be informed about your area of industry, not necessarily your own profession, but what's going on in industry. I use Aller a lot for that. It's a great resource. It gives you competitive intelligence. I would be lost without Google Alerts. I have them for just a myriad of things, from things I want to read about, learn about, and grow in, and then just daily resumes and so forth that are coming my way. I use TalkWalker Alerts as well. I found that efficient. OneNote is my go-to source. Other people use Google and Evernote and a lot of different things, but having worked at Microsoft, I guess I drank the Kool-Aid. And everything I do is in OneNote. I keep records there, every candidate I speak with, all those kind of conversations. It's searchable, and it's really a very productive tool for me. For those of us that don't have a CRM, HubSpot has a free CRM that is just great. When I was a contract recruiter back in the day, I used PC Recruiter. I had that to keep track of people because I didn't violate any rules or ethics with the companies I supported, but it gave me a way to manage messaging and that sort of thing. And HubSpot is, better priced and certainly a contemporary model. So just to wrap up the first stage of being an artist, it's really, you're the artist. So if you think back to our outbound recruiting kinds of things, how you send your messages and how you message people in the different formats, SMS or however you do it, is a great way for you to show your creativity. How you participate in social media is a great way to differentiate yourself. Content marketing is really the next phase of recruiting and building your credibility and so forth. And we're told that it's going to be in video format. So everything so by 2020 or 2021 is, 90% of the web is supposed to be video. So I guess we should get out our iPhones and start recording ourselves. And then newsletters are also a great way to keep track if you're trying to nurture a relationship with target talent over a long period of time. So putting on our science hat, putting on our smock and thinking about things from a scientific standpoint, for me, I think about kind of three things. The first is this moment of truth, and I'm sure you recognize it. You have a hiring manager, or you maybe have a client who comes to you and said, "Is that the best you can do? Is this the best candidate we have available? Is this the best slate of candidates that we have available?" And it causes you to pause, doesn't it? And you have to think, well, let me see, what have I done? And so what I found is that if I have a process that I can repeat and is successful, then I can either show my hiring manager or, mentally go through it and say, did I do this? Did I cover that? Did I look at this group? Did I look for this association and those kind of things? If we do those things, then we can have predictable outcomes. I can tell you that if I create an event, let's call it a tech briefing, that I know if I will get 8% of the people I message will say they're coming to the event and 5% will show up. I know that because I've done it at 3 different organizations. And that's the kind of repetition, and that's the kind of thing you can, it really changes how you're perceived as an expert, and it also brings about amazing results, and it's something you can share with others. So I encourage you to do that. One of the things that I do that not a lot of people want to talk about is, what's your process? And so my process involves several pages of information, which I'm not going to show here, but it really starts with the rec review. It starts with preliminary research on what the requisition is and the talent supply and those kind of things. And I have a checklist that I literally go through at different times and say, have I done this on this? Have I thought about this? And just a way to remind me, to leave some breadcrumbs around the process. And if anybody wants it, hit me up on LinkedIn and I'll be happy to share it with you. It's just something that I've developed over the last 20 years or so that really worked for me, particularly when I was a contract recruiter. It was very helpful because I was going from place to place and it kept me in balance. Glenn Cathy, who's a process nerd, if you don't know that, I asked him a question once about process, and 2 hours later he was still talking. So great guy, great mind, one of the best that I've met. And he, with permission, I'm sharing this. He has kind of a iterative process that he goes through when he thinks about a search, and he being the Boolean black belt, you would think he would have a great process, and he does. So you'll be able to get the slides if you complete a short reference on how the webinar went. So I encourage you to do that, and I realize a lot of information is coming your way. So data, how do we own that relationship and how do we own the data? So when I break the conversation about data, I break it down into three areas. One is, it's the talent pool data. And I borrowed this graphic from Manpower because I thought it was just outstanding. So when you think about it, the group of people that we have, are grouped together by their skills and that become our target talent, and it's really they belong to a group of other companies, and I just thought that was a really cool way of showing it, and we'll dive into some talent pool data in a little bit. Persona data is becoming very popular. It's really what makes these folks tick, and it's not just that they have a title of software developer. It's what do they think about? What do they read? What's their age? And I'm not using that in a discriminatory manner, but kind of are they Gen Z? Are they millennials? Are they boomers? Because each of those groups seems to have different ideas and different motivations. And then finally, we think about the individual prospects and what their profile will look like, and connecting them with all the different organizations and so forth that they belong to. So when I think about talent pool data, I think about, and I have some slides here on software developers. I did a project a few months ago and just sort of looked around and so tried to find out how much information can I find about developers, and it's frightening how much is out there. So think about HackerRank, and they draw up the states where the developers live, and not only the states where they live, but by language. And so it's a great way of your doing technical recruiting to find this out. So I'm kind of a collector, a hoarder of information on what makes people tick and what talent is looking for. So I'm showing a few different slides on this. So you move into persona data, and part of when you think about developers is, what are they looking for? What do they want in that next job? What's going to motivate them to look? And this survey, actually, it's two surveys done by the same organization, Key Values, that went after two different groups of people, and they're not the same. And they look for different things. And I think one of the challenges that we have as recruiters and sourcers is when you think about a technical group of people, and they don't want to be contacted by phone, they don't want to be contacted by email, but they want us to tell them about a job when it's available that's going to be perfect for them. And short of carrier pigeons, I'm not sure what we can do. So I think it's something that we just have to work through and be professional about it. But it's almost like we're supposed to be mind readers, and yet it's something that's very, very important that we master that ability to be respectful and be relevant and provide valuable information to the target audiences when they need it. Another perspective that Key Values showed us is these are the people, and this is what they think about. Some are independent, they're collaborative. This is how they describe themselves. Glassdoor gives us a pretty good insight into why people leave their jobs. And so they provide this. And they also tell us that these are the reliable sources. So if you're thinking about where you get referrals, this would give you an idea of where people go to get referrals. And then of all things, they say that 97% of these software engineers go to Glassdoor to read about a company before they accept an offer. The thing to remember about your data is think about what people are selling. So I'm not saying Glassdoor's data is tainted, it's not, but these folks are coming to Glassdoor. Glassdoor is doing a survey on the people that come there, and of course they're reading reviews. So, you have to sort of filter through it and think about the perspective and the agenda of the people in the data. So it's sometimes it's hard to get accurate data. We find that data is somewhat directionally correct, and I hate the word, but it is probably the best way to describe data like that. Again, a nice idea of the education level of different people, and so if you're trying to find a college degree, you know, your pool's a little bit narrower than somebody that may be self-taught. This is from Stack Overflow, and again, it's just pointing out what people value as they assess jobs, what goes through their mind. So when we think about technology, think about a technology stack, and I think we need to have a personal technology stack that works for you and it works in the way you work. So, you know, when you go back to the first step of sort of deciding what you are and how you want to work and those kind of things, and the second step, when you think about the process, that's going to correlate well to the kinds of tools that you're going to get. I'm a tool junkie, but honestly, I worked with Dean DaCosta, and I mean, you know, he has not met a Chrome extension he doesn't love, and frankly, I don't have the mind or the time to figure all those out. So I typically will use talent sourcing tools that relate well to what my work is, and then I always recommend people to invest wisely in the tools. You can't get everything for free all the time, and if you do, it's going to take all your time to use a few credits here and a few credits there and so forth. So I've found that over the years that the tools that really work for me are worthwhile to make the investment in myself. I typically want something that to scrape information. I typically want something to parse information. I want a tool that also enriches the data. So it's going to look for email addresses. It's going to look for information that would be mapped to this same person on multiple channels or multiple different sites. So a developer might be with GitHub or Stack Overflow and LinkedIn, and I'd like to see all of that data. I like to aggregate the data. For me, it's really important to understand the total profile of a target and what they do, because that helps sometimes in how I engage with them. And then, of course, speaking of engaging, I like to have a tool that I can engage with, whether it be a CRM or even Outlook, whatever it is. I want to be able to track that. When I think about the toolbox that I use, I think about three tools, and ironically, these three tools are sponsors of Sourcing 7, so it kind of works out really well for me. That I can't recommend tools because I work for a defense contractor, but I can tell you that these companies invest heavily in the Puget Sound talent sourcing community and recruiting community. So they're partners at times. But ZapInfo is a parser of information. It enriches the data. It works really well with getting, just going to websites and extracting information. So I would think parsing, scraping, enriching would how I've described it. Seekout is a tool that, as it's evolved, it's based on LinkedIn profiles, and has added other sites to it, GitHub and Facebook and other data to enrich the data. It looks for email addresses. It's a nice. It provides you competitive intelligence. You can take a position that your company has by title, and it'll show you where the competitors are and who they work for and so forth. Nice tool for that. HireTool is, again, based on LinkedIn profiles. Both HireTool and Seekout use artificial intelligence to make recommendations on potential people. Again, they support the local communities. So the final thing that we're going to talk about is marketing. And in marketing, we're all called to be marketers, and the first thing I'll talk about is a little bit about marketing think. How do you think like a marketer? And then I'm going to talk about how to become knowledgeable about your space, and then finally touch on how to become a little better known in your area. So the things that I learned over the last decade of being in recruitment marketing and building talent communities and the different things that I've done, the most important foundational thing that I learned is it's not about me. It's about the target audience that I'm trying to reach. And so if that causes a shift, and it's taken a while for companies to understand that it really isn't about us anymore. It's about them. And the mindset we need to have is the person receiving our message is asking themselves, what's in it for me? It may have started a couple of days ago when you got an email saying, here's a webinar that's sponsored by Search Wizards and Sourcing 7. And your first thought probably is, what's in it for me? Why would I invest an hour of my time into this? One thing I learned about early on is everything is in beta. So when you think about the tools we work with, I mentioned Seekout as it has evolved. The idea is that there's never a finished product. It's constantly changing. So Zap and HireTool and Seekout all listen to their customers, and improvements are made daily, weekly, monthly. And so everything is constantly being updated. And I think that's the same way with people's careers. We're kind of always in beta and always change. One of the fundamental things that in recruiting and sourcing that we don't do enough of is to really get down to a granular level on what the talent brand is. Putting out a big employment brand saying, we're XYZ company and we do this and this is our culture and so forth, that's all great. But to the person coming into the job, they want to know, what is it like to work there? I want to hear from people that are actually doing the job, and to take it down to that level. So when you think about things that you can do as a recruiter or sourcer, if you can video people that are in jobs and they can describe what they do, why they're there, why they stay there, what they like about it, those kind of things, you'll be further ahead. The most important thing you can do in your profession is to build trust. It's the currency of the digital age. We live in an era of untruth. It is just, we'll skip it, but it's just remarkable that we don't trust institutions, we don't trust people. And so as a professional, that's the most valuable thing you can bring to the table, is this trust building. And finally, you need to have a consistent message, because your audience is always changing. If you think about people that are in a passive condition, a passive audience, passive candidate, passive prospect, however you want to describe it, they may suddenly, with a news of a layoff or a news of losing a contract, they suddenly may be an active candidate. So you need to be out there and to be known and so forth, so that you can take advantage of that. The prospect journey is very involved, and it's hard. No one has really figured out how to manage this. Before somebody applies for a job, there's about 14 to 18 different places that they would go to look for that job before they apply. And so the job of the inbound people is to figure out how to fill up those channels and be there. The job of ours in the outbound is to selectively use some of these channels to position ourselves so that we can be seen and be relevant when people are looking for a job. To get knowledge, this is similar to some of the data we had before. This is from Ceridian. It's brand new. Why are people leaving their job? Why do they stay in the job they're in? And where do they look outside? When they look outside, and this is an interesting survey because these people were happy. 77% of the people that were in this survey were absolutely ecstatic where they were. Yet they would look for a job. 20% were active, so that's part of the 23% that weren't happy where they were. But the challenge is we treat all people as active. And a lot of times we're sending messages that are aimed at an active person. Sending a job ad is aimed at an active person. To be effective today and to relate to talent, we have to dive a little bit deeper into people's motivation and capture that in our email messages or our conversation or the stories that we're getting from people. I like this image and it's about a decade old, but it really rang home to me that's somehow how it happened. So be known. So the last couple of hacks to think about. Derek Zeller, who had a webinar last month, I think, on the Sourcing 7 Search Wizard channel, showed this in a Sourcing 7 summit. It was how to be better known, and he said it starts with your LinkedIn profile, and rather than talk about yourself, talk about what you do for the company and what profession you're in. And I found that was very effective. After listening to him, I changed my approach, and I added also something that Craig Fisher talked about, and that's putting keywords like I work with systems engineers, so I created all this language of keywords that somebody in systems engineering would have, and so what happened is suddenly I was bringing all of the people back that are. I went from 400 views a week to like 1,600 views a week on people that were looking at my profile. So it made my job a lot easier. I want to close with this quote from Guy Kawasaki. He's a famous author and blogger and tech guy, but I just thought he captured so well what we're all about. When you think about that, what we do in recruiting is we're asking people to change their lives, to bet their lives on our organization, and he asked a question which I in turn asked, can it get any scarier for them and any tougher for you than this? And so thank you today for the opportunity. Certainly open to questions. I have included in here is a list of some resources, a couple of sites. If you don't use them, you should check them out. I did an article on sourcing tools last year. I'll be updating it soon. They keep changing. So anyway, thank you for your attention and time, and I'm available for questions.
Marvin, we had a question while you're talking before from Nidhi Jane. She wanted to know if you had any recommendation for sourcing tools in the European region. Seems like maybe she tried Seek Out and HireTool and thought they weren't as strong outside of the U.S.
I'm not the expert on that. I would recommend going to the Secret Sourcing group on Facebook or the SourceCon group on Facebook or a couple others and asking that question. I would just force it a note to Dean DaCosta. He probably knows.
Right, it's got an app for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
Any other questions? You're all on mute. I think you can probably unmute yourself or type the question into the chat box, and I'll make sure he gets it. I know I liked your image. It's a nice change from the funnel.
Yeah, thank you. I like that.
Yeah, we've been talking about being creative quite a bit here. So sourcing is one of these things that's just ever evolving, and you have to have a process that you follow. And, you know, if you get to the end of that process and you still haven't found your candidate, then you have to sort of take a look at where you've been and where you can go from there. It's not it's not a black and white thing that we do.
Right. It's what do you do when all else fails? And that's one of those big questions that I don't get as much in a corporate environment as I used to get, you know, as a contractor or you know, working as a third-party person. I got that a lot more. Or ask myself that, you know, when when's nothing working, you know, what do you do?
I've lost connection, so I don't know if you can see the chat box, but I'm unable to see it for some reason. I don't know if we have any other questions. Oh, here we go.
Yes. I have a question for you. Can you, you know, talk a little bit about, you know, some of the differences that you see between, let's say, you know, a role that is talent sourcing, doing source screen and submit types of activities versus somebody who's doing research versus somebody who may be doing some market intelligence? What are some of the differences in those roles that you personally see, and maybe some personality characteristics that would, you know, fit and be successful in those types of roles?
Yeah, sure. So when I think about that first pillar of sourcing, you know, which is for me, the explore, you know, where you think about the research and you think about the data. One of the best sources I've worked with was a librarian by education, and so her approach to research was just mind-numbing for me. I mean, she was and is outstanding at it, and so it's more about, you know, looking in places that most of us don't think about and using as many tools as possible. And that role is kind of evolving now. As I mentioned, talent mapping is really important, and that area for the people that really like research is really taking hold. I know Amazon has people in that role. I know Nike has people in that role. We have Dean DaCosta at our place, and Dean does a lot of work with finding information on people, particularly contact information on people that normally people can't find. I see that really increasing because, frankly, a recruiter that sources doesn't have the time to go that deep on it. You just don't. And you know, we're going to be kind of superficial about it. We're going to, you know, we might hit an 80% of the possibles, and just because we don't have enough time. Whereas the person that has the time also keeps track and builds creates research that's findable again. In other words, we're kind of working with a finite group of people. We're not producing enough, whether it's an engineer or whether it's a data analyst or whatever we are trying to find. There's not enough people to go around. So there's shortages, and we haven't even hit the shortages yet. We're still filling the jobs. In a year or two, that's when people are really going to be cringing, because there's just not enough people to go around in those roles that are common to industries and so forth. So we'll need to keep those people. We'll have to build a relationship. So that's going to create on the other end of the spectrum, the people that are going to nurture those relationships and build communities around it and bring value to those people in their professions when they're not even looking for a job. I found in the talent community work that I've done here at Lockheed, that's what really resonates with people is how do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them in orbit when they're not actively looking? And so it's providing value to them at each stage of their career. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, good stuff. I think I'm having internet issues, so I'm unable to see the chat box. Amy Beth, do you see any questions coming in from others before we let Marvin go on with his day?
I don't see questions, but I don't think I'm seeing all of the chat here. So if you have questions, if you've added a question into the chat, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it on the line.
I'm back.
Well, I just want to give a shout out to Search Wizards for supporting us. Thank you again for what all you do and supporting our community. So
That's a great community, and we appreciate you joining us today. I have a feeling you're going to get hit up on LinkedIn. I know I
Good.
personally am going to be asking you for that or waiting for the PDF. All right, so we'll just let everyone go on with their day. Thank you so much, Marvin, for joining us and for Sourcing 7. Like they said before, if you fill out the survey, you'll be receiving a copy of the handout here, and we'll also be sharing a recording at a later date.
thank you.
Thank
Everybody
you.
have a good day.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you.